Okay, so that is our cue to go ahead and get started for today's IDRPP's Early Intervention Echo. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have you with us today. As you noticed, excuse me, we are recording today's session. We use those for quality improvement as well as educational purposes. You are able to go back and review those, share those out with other colleagues and others that may be interested in hearing about today's session. Or if you're like me, I need multiple times to hear it before I actually digest it. So it's easy to go back and review a video in all the spare time I know that we all have throughout the day. We are hoping that this will be interactive. So if you feel comfortable and turn your cameras on and let us all see your smiling faces, as well as just put your comments or questions into chat, we will make sure that those get answered. Leo, one of our hub members, will monitor that for us and make sure that if it's not addressed in the presentation, that it gets answered towards the end of the session. We do talk about families, clients that we work with. So please remember to protect their individual privacy. Avoid using any identifiable information or markers. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to a hub member who will either already have an asterisk in front of their name or will be quickly changing it because then they're just easier to locate in chat when that asterisk is in front of their name instead of that alphabetical order. And you can always reach out to one of us if you are unsure of that. If you've never joined an Echo session, thank you for joining it and welcome to your first one. We always have some key components of an echo. So we always have a subject matter expert. Today we have Daphne, an amazing SLP and BCBA, who's going to be sharing with us about augmentative communication. Then we do a case presentation and small breakout rooms where we all discuss that case and provide suggestions, strategies, and recommendations, which is a great way to get to know that professional networking, other people on the call, and throughout the state, as well as all the states that join us, what's happening. We've all been on Zoom for a minute, so we probably all know how to rename, raise our hand, put comments and questions into chat. But if you'll take a minute and rename your profile, again, it just helps all of us know who we can reach out to. So like I see right now, Shauna Packer on my screen, she works at DDI Vantage. So the amazing things that she shares, if I had follow-up questions, I know where I can reach out to her. And I know it's always fun to be called out on. So thank you, Shauna, for being my guinea pig. It's sometimes you never know who's going to show up on my screen and name I get to call. In order to get a certificate of attendance, we do ask that you complete the survey. So throughout today's session, Tori will be dropping in the survey link as well as the presentation PowerPoints throughout today's session so that you can complete that survey. And thank you to everybody who does complete those surveys. On the survey, we also have a line that says put in your email, your mailing address and your contact information. That's so that we can send you out thank yous for completing those surveys. So if you would like some free swag, some free stuff, make sure you put your address in those. Canvas is where we store everything. So if you would like access to our Canvas page, please just email earlyecho@usu.edu and we will get you access to the Canvas page. Canvas also has an opportunity to have discussions. That's another way to just connect with people and get questions answered. Case studies are an amazing way to hear from all of these amazing colleagues on the call. I love doing case studies, especially like today. I'm the one who gets to present about a client that I am working with, and I'm thrilled. I can't wait to hear all of the great recommendations and ideas that you have that I then can take back when I go and work with this family or other families that I'm working with that are pretty similar to that. So if you're interested in sharing a case with us or getting resources and recommendations, please just reach out to, or again, earlyecho@usu.edu, and we will get you set up on our schedule for that. We do have a Facebook group that we can continue different discussions or receive updates on upcoming sessions. So if you're interested in joining our Facebook group, feel free to scan that QR code, as well as follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We share resources, information, and anything about upcoming and past sessions. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and turn the time over to Daphne.
And I will start sharing. Let's see if we can get this the right way. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
Perfect.
I'm so excited to be here. This is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I can talk about this for a really long time. I'm also so excited to see a familiar face online from back in Germany. So um, it's just kind of fun to connect with everyone. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a clinical assistant professor in the speech language pathology program here at Utah State University. I'm a dually certified speech pathologist as well as a board certified behavior analyst. So the main work I do is with kids with autism, but when it comes to AAC, I see everyone across the lifespan. I'm also part of the Utah Regional Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, URLEND for short, and I don't have anything to disclose, so there's nothing that I get from this presentation. There's a couple of things I hope that you get from today's session. So I want you to be able to identify different barriers that may occur as you're trying to maybe use an alternative method of communication. I would love for you to be able to consider different types of aided communication systems with the clients that you work with. And also different ways to implement that for functional communication strategies that you may need if there's some challenging behavior that goes along with clients that may not be able to verbally communicate their wants and needs. So I'm hoping that that's you're gonna gain out of this. Maybe even other things as well, but those are kind of my objectives for today. To get started, I just want to quickly go over what the definition of communication is according to ASHA, the American Speech Language and Hearing Association. It's the active process of exchanging information and ideas. Communication involves both understanding and expression. Forms of expression may include personalized movements, we call those unaided communication, gestures, objects, vocalizations, verbalizations, signs, pictures, symbols, printed words, and output from augmentative and alternative AAC devices. So that in and of itself gives you a lot of information already as to where we can go with communication and different aspects of that. Now, the title today is more than just pictures because there are lots of different options that we want to consider. But before we even get into looking at different kinds of communication strategies or what is out there, there's something that I want us to look at a little bit more in detail. So when I'm doing an AAC assessment with someone that comes in and they, may not be able to communicate to the full, to to everything that they need and also want. It's not only about their need, but also like what do they actually want to communicate. I use this participation model flowchart. Now it's very involved, so I'm not, and I teach an entire semester on this, so I'm not going to obviously go over all of this, but for the purpose of this presentation, I want you to consider a few different aspects when it comes to barriers. Why is it that someone isn't able to communicate really? And we look a lot about at like motor barriers, which we would consider here in the access barriers, but there are also some other opportunity barriers that unless we address those with the families and with the person themselves, I think it would be really difficult to actually get to them communicating on their own. So I want to just go a little bit more into this aspect of this lovely flow chart, and talk about just briefly about the barriers that are sometimes existent for kids that are nonverbal, and why they don't end up communicating with an alternative method of communication. Now, policy may not be as relevant for early intervention, but sometimes policy can occur in schools if the kids aren't allowed to take their systems home, and then they don't have the opportunity to practice their communication in that sense. Sometimes, as a speech pathologist, and maybe fellow pathologists have the same experience, the device or the system, whatever it is, maybe PECs or something, comes out when they come to speech, and it goes back in there. It goes back in their backpack when you're done with speech, and it doesn't ever see the light of day for the rest of the time until they come back to speech. So that's a practice barrier, right? So how can we, as practitioners, help families really identify situations where it's easy for them to practice whatever system it is, whether that is sign or whether that's a device or it's a picture type system. How can we help them identify that? And if I can't help them identify that as a practitioner, I think that there's a huge barrier where we're going to see slower success overall. So keep that in mind. The other ones have more to do with us, right? So whatever system we're maybe trying to implement, whether that's sign or whether that's an AAC device or whether that's PECs, do I, as the facilitator, know how it actually works? And do I, as a facilitator, also have the skill to use it? So if I give someone a device, can you find a dog? Can you find the strawberry on it? Are you able to find these different things? And if that's not the case, maybe that's the first step for you to really become a little bit more fluent in that. The other thing is maybe I'm using sign, right? Maybe sign is the mode that I'm choosing. Now, do I have the skill to have all the signs? Do I have all the ability to express what I want to express? And so this is more of like a self-reflective um, exercise that, maybe it doesn't mean that you can't implement something that you don't 100% know all the time, but it is something that you need to keep in mind to continuously grow with the client that you're working with when it comes to implementing AAC. The other thing that comes up is attitude barriers. Sometimes maybe you want to implement an alternative method of communication, and you kind of get resistance from parents, that's going to hinder a child's verbal communication. That's probably the most common barrier that I see, that parents are a little bit hesitant to implement something. Now, I obviously don't force any parent. I'm not going to do something that is completely against their their expectations, but I also try to educate them on the benefits. I try to model it to them what it can do, and the research is very clear that an alternative method of communication does not hinder verbal communication. So that's important to know when it comes to that attitude barrier. Now, sometimes you have teachers that have that attitude barrier that it's too hard to implement. So then we want to make sure that we are helping them identify situations where it becomes a little bit easier. So, um, barriers are some things, at least from my professional practice, that I see often neglected. And so I want you to pay attention to these, especially these opportunity barriers that are going to impede your progress later on. So that's why I wanted to talk about those first before we even dive into the different kinds of systems. Now, when it comes to assessment, this is the big assessment that we usually do, like assessing their motor movements, assessing their current modes of communication, assessing kind of their receptive language skills. Um, and I think we're pretty good at that. So, um, and that's a whole other aspect of the AAC process. But like I said, the opportunity barriers get neglected a lot. So here's just a definition for you. So the opportunity barriers are, for example, the ability and willingness to use AAC system. What is the family support? What is the motivation to communicate? What is the technological knowledge or ability of use and family facilitator? And what are some of the policies that maybe stand in the way? And then access barriers would be reduced confidence in communication, whether cognitive deficits, visual and motor impairments, lack of acceptance of disability and or AAC use. See that more in the adult population, and then limitations and capability of AAC systems, seating and positioning. And I saw that you have seating and positioning on the schedule next, I believe. So that'll be kind of maybe feed into that as well. So when we talk about different kinds of symbol systems, we talk about different types of symbols. And so we talk about unaided symbols and aided symbols. Unaided just means I don't have to have any outside material with me. I have that on my body at all times, where aided just means it's something external that I need to bring with me. And we have lots of different options here when it comes to that. So, unaided symbols and are gestures that can be body movements, facial expressions, eye movements, and posture changes. So, when I do an assessment, I look at the child when I walk into the room. Does their body change? Do they turn to me or do they turn away from me? Does their tension change? Does that tension change mean maybe they are in a heightened state of anxiety, or does that mean they're excited? What can I learn from their posture and just their body movement? Facial expressions say a lot, right? Whether someone is is interested in interacting with me or not. If a child can move, and I tell this to my students all the time, the children vote with their feet. If they walk away from me, if they run away from me, then that is a vote kind of against interacting with me. And I probably have to try a little harder to get them engaged with me, but it's a clear sign of communication. So body movement is extremely important. And where are they turning to? And how can I start building that connection with the client so that their body movement is towards me, their posture is towards me, their posture is relaxed, and their facial expressions show that they are ready to engage with me. Now, sometimes with the really involved kids, with, they have feeding tubes and they're in wheelchairs and they have all sorts of different challenges that go along, like medical challenges that go along with communication in that sense. It's sometimes hard to assess their posture and their body movements just because maybe there's some involuntary movements going on. I really note down every involuntary sounds, even like sneezing and coughing and maybe like throat clearing, anything like that. I note down to see if there are changes. Now, I don't do that with every client that I work with, but I do that with the kids that are that are limited in their mobility to really see if I can note down a pattern of how they're communicating potentially through those involuntary sounds. Um, I also note down any other kind of sounds that they're making. So, I mean, maybe they're making sounds together with a facial expression, like a squealing sound or things like that. I will note that down. Um, and if they do have other types of, if so, that's kind of the unaided. It's not necessarily a system, but it is something that I look at. And if there is something that I can do when it comes to gestures, is there something that motor wise they're able to reliably do? Can I then implement gestures? Now, when it comes to alternative methods of communication, obviously, if you have a standard system like ASL, that works fabulously. Some kids can't do complicated movements like that, so I will modify it to whatever the child can do with their motor movements, as long as everyone else in their environment understands that symbol the way that it is presented. So, that's important to note, right? We speak about intelligibility of the sign. It doesn't have to be ASL standard. You can make up your own signs if you want to. It's just a nice place to get started um, with that. I want to spend most of my time on the aided symbols. And what we can use. So some kids really don't understand picture symbols yet. It is really a developmental progression to understand picture symbols. So there are some kids where I start with real objects or miniature objects or parts of an object. So maybe I use a dinosaur from a game that they like to play. So that's partially um, part of that object, part of that game, right? Or I use a miniature, um, I don't know, like a miniature doll that then tells me that the kid wants to play with a dollhouse, things like that. So tangible objects are absolutely things that we can start with if the picture symbols aren't quite working yet. So picture symbols have to be learned. They It's easier for a child to understand photographs than line drawings. And it should be, we have the rules of like how do we take the picture on like a neutral background and you just want that thing on there. Um, but it's always funny to me when I do look at picture books, like kind of how different the some of the pictures look, but it makes it easier for the child if the background is neutral and if it is something that the child is familiar with. And then you can move into orthographic symbols, such as Braille and finger spelling, or if they can write later on writing. But I don't think that's as relevant for the early intervention folks. Um, we talk about low tech or no tech. right? So we get started with low tech, which means basically nothing is operated by a battery. And I've limited there's lots of different options for no tech systems, but just because this is more for early intervention, I kind of limited it to these four different types of no tech, which is adapted books, PECs, which you're probably familiar with. Pod is also a picture system that is actually a lot more used outside of the United States than it is used within the United States, and I'm not quite sure why. I don't use it a ton, but I went to an AAC conference in Australia, and I swear 50% of the kids that were there that were using alternative communication were using Pod. So it's a very effective system. I've seen it used very effectively, so it is an option, so I included it here. And then we have communication boards that are super effective and valuable. And maybe you're already doing some of these things to enhance communication, but these are maybe just validating what you're already doing, or it's maybe giving you some more ideas of different types of how to foster communication. Um, so the adapted books are awesome because it enhances early literacy skills. It focuses on participation in typical activities in a classroom. It can help with peer engagement, and it can also be helpful in creating successes in regular classrooms. And there can be some shared enjoyment. So I just put some pictures of ideas of adapted books. Honestly, whenever I go to, different schools or special education classrooms, there's always new ideas that I see. So obviously, this is not um, a complete list or complete ideas of what you can do, but this is just something to maybe get you started. Having some bottle caps glued to each page, or popsicle sticks, or just some, puffy balls that you can put on each page to help with just that movement. Bigger books are always helpful to make page turning easier. You can also use adaptive books for any of these typical books that we have, right? So having pictures from the book, either outside that they can then add to the book, or take off and add to the sequence that they want to do. So felt boards to sequence events is always something that you can do. You can symbolize the number and like work on some math skills at the same time. But here, instead of having to say 3 plums, right, the child can now add the 3 plums to the page, and there we have also participation in reading the book. I love how this book was adapted, especially because I work with a lot of kids that have a hard time with expressing their feelings. And it just has a whole sentence strip of what happens, and then the symbol that goes along with the feeling, and it goes through all of the different types of feelings that are in that book. Another way, so this is obviously we're going on a bear hunt, and then brown bear, brown bear. If you have the felt that goes along with it, you can always have the child then sequence how that works. And you work on a lot of different things as you're sequencing a book. You work on a lot of cognitive skills, you work on receptive language skills, you also work on expressive skills as they're saying, oh, what, yellow duck. And instead of saying it, they're putting it on the page. So there's a lot of communication happening when you're sequencing out a book that you're using. So that's a way to use books in an adaptive way. And then the next one I want to talk about is that picture exchange communication system, short for PECS. It is something to help the child really learn this cause and effect of communication. I give you something and I get something in return. And it breaks it down into the different phases. I'm not going to talk about the different phases here. If this is something relevant to you at any point, I've started using PECs with kids that were not even 2 years old yet. As long as they have the ability to grasp a picture off a page and hand it over, um, you can start implementing PECs. Now, it is pretty detailed and it does take a third person that helps along with that. So I usually involve the parents when it comes to that. But when it comes to, sometimes people are like, well, I don't have that third person and I don't know all the different phases. You can do something similar where you're having a child exchange pictures, but sometimes you get stuck at different stages, and then it's helpful to maybe have someone fill in some of these blanks. If you haven't seen a PECS book, this is a PECS book where the child takes the card off the page, hands it over to the communication partner, and then they get maybe their car or their goldfish, whatever it is that they were looking for. Later on, they create a whole sentence. So you have the sentence strip at the bottom where they then say, I want something, or they even describe something and say, I see something, I hear something, and so forth. So we're not just stuck with the requesting when it comes to that. This is what a pod books looks like. So you see that there's different setups of a pod book, where you have like a page at the beginning, and it usually has the person then flip to the next page. So you see a lot of color coordination at the bottom here. So if the child chooses blue, then you go to the blue tab right there, and so forth. But it is partner assisted. So if you wanted to use this, you always have to have a communication partner that helps the child really flip to the next page. Now, there are a couple of companies that now have created an electronic app version of Pod, which makes it a little bit more independent because you don't have to have that other person that's flipping to different pages for you. So that's what Pod looks like. You can see it is a no-tech system, but it is pretty involved. Like you have lots of different tabs. The books are literally pretty thick. I don't know if any of you have used Pod before. And you slowly increase the pages that you're adding. So I know this is the PowerPoint is being sent out. There's a link to a video that shows kind of how it's used, but just for time sake, I'm gonna continue on. Communication boards are a really nice, quick solution for temporary communication, or when you're doing something that is a specific theme. Maybe you're talking about something very specific. Maybe it's, I don't know, um, Pioneer Day, which is only a thing in Utah, right? I was going to say Mardi Gras, but because I lived in Louisiana for a little while. But Pioneer Day, right? So maybe this is something that you have an activity with a child, and you want some temporary communication abilities there that you don't have in their book and you don't have readily there. You can create a communication board with relevant vocabulary for that specific event. Um, can be used with some children initially before you get started with their own system, right? If you don't have anything, I always have like a communication board with me just in case, right? Like just in case I want to just try it out, see what happens. Especially with those parents that maybe have a little bit of hesitation when it comes to picture communication systems. What if I just have a laminated board that I bring out which is not as threatening as coming with an entire book of here are all we're going to get started with this alternative way of communicating. So that's always a good way to maybe get things started initially. Um, and then if you have a kid that does have higher tech systems, there's um, always technical glitches. So having communication boards as a backup is crucial. I have these backups for all my clients, just because there's always going to be something that goes wrong. It's inevitable, unfortunately. So that's kind of the no tech, low tech that I wanted to talk about. And then here are some mid tech options. Mid tech just means that at this point we are using batteries to operate our different devices. I'm not sure how much you're going to be using any of these, but just I wanted to make it have it complete. We have these Go Talk options where they come in different sizes, so you actually record what this button would say. Um, I don't know, maybe some of you have used these. These buttons can change based on which overlay you have. So you have 5 different overlays within the system, and these buttons up top, they always stay the same. So my favorite is probably the 3x3 to use with a child to just try things out. Here we have a birthday party that's going on, and so hello and bye is always stays the same. Um, and here again, we have these 9 buttons that you can change and have 5 different overlays too. And here you just have a 20 option. They are created with different companies, same concept. These are nice if you have like a book that you're reading and you want to use some of that vocabulary and you program it in. They are really nice. Now, this is a system that I discovered maybe like six or 7 years ago for visually impaired kids. And it's really nice. This Logan Tech company was designed by a father with a visually impaired child. And maybe some of you know about it and some of you don't. But you have this yeah, just this device right here, the blue one, for example. And then you have these cards that have small objects on them. So they're tactile symbols, basically. And they have a little microchip on the back. And when you lay it onto this device, it'll say it'll say the small object that is that is attached to the card. So you have the tactile input, you also have the auditory input, and you have a little bit more independence as long as the child can like match the card to this um, initial device. So that's a really nice system that I've used with visually impaired children if they have the ability to receive auditory input. So that's nice. Now, the same concept exists with these types of systems. They look kind of similar to PECs, but these cards, these picture cards right here, also again have that little microchip on the back that when you put it onto one of these spots, it'll say what the symbol is. So that's pre-recorded, which is really nice. Um, so that's an option that's just a little bit different, which is I feel like not as well known. Um, now these are just buttons that we use that have a single message, so you can program a single message onto these buttons. Now, I just for kicks and giggles, what single message, if you had only one single message that you could put into that you could give a child, what would it be? If you want to share in the chat, maybe put in the single message that you think would be most relevant to put in there. Know or eat. I love that. Go. More help, help, help. Yep. Lots of helps. Snack. All done. Yeah, those are great. Those are great options. Drink. Obviously, these are nice because you can change them in the moment, but definitely help more go would be some that would be bathroom. That would be really relevant for me all the time, actually. Yeah, it depends. It depends on the child, right? But you want to make it as universally play is a good one. Stop is a really good one. Stop and go. Maybe you have two, right? Um, that would be so. I mean, if we want to work with the culture that we're in, red for stop and green for go, soft, mom, those are all great options. You want to be really intentional about then having lots of opportunities to practice, right? The concept yes and no, I want to warn a little bit. It's actually really challenging for a child to grasp yes and no, because it actually is pretty abstract at the beginning. To us, it seems very straightforward, yes and no, because we already know what it means. But it actually is quite abstract for a child to learn. So if I were, to walk into a session and I don't really know the child super well, my go-tos would be stop, go, more, and help. Those are probably my go-tos. Now, there's lots of reason for other things, such as drink, play, soft, bathroom. If you know the child already better, right? If you already know their needs more. Now we have the big one, which is the Big Mac, which is easy to access. You have some that are a little bit smaller. I actually really like these bricks because you can stick them together, so you can add on to them, and they're called talking bricks. And they have really good voice quality too, and you can charge them like with a USB charger, which I actually really like. You don't necessarily have to worry about always having batteries as long as you charge them. Now, the ones that I don't love are these Go Talk buttons. They are very quiet, and I feel like they only work half of the time. Um, but if you have them, it's better than nothing, right? Here you have four messages, here you have two messages. There are some where you have sequenced messages, so those are good for reading books, for example, and yeah, can be really helpful. When do we use buttons for those kids where we want a single message? We're just trying to establish some communication. With low cognitive profile, those kids that are starting to communicate, to participate in a variety of different activities, and to establish that cause effect connection of communication. So that's where they become really relevant. And then from then on, I'm start expanding. I do want to talk about high-tech devices. I know this market of high-tech, a gazillion different apps can be very confusing. And I just want to, I don't know, sort it out a little bit. I actually have this spreadsheet that I'm happy to share, but I don't know how relevant it is, where I have the most common used devices and who they would be relevant for to use, just because I needed to put that into kind of a system for myself when I'm teaching. For me, it makes pretty good sense, but when I'm teaching it to my students, it's really difficult for them to like wrap their head around. Um, when it comes to high-tech devices, we differentiate between hardware and software, just like we do with our computers. There are different companies that have different devices, as well as different software that goes onto the device. And so you have different companies that produce different hardware. A lot of the times they're just different sizes. Some of the hardware is related to the access method. Maybe it's eye gaze or touch or switch. And so you want to pay attention to that. And then we have all sorts of different softwares. And some of them only go with one company. Some of them go on iPads. Some of them don't go on iPads. Some of them go on Android devices and all of that. And that's what makes it so confusing, right? Because you have all these different options. Um, but sorting it all out, and maybe there are some that are your favorites. I think that that's totally appropriate as long as they are reliable. I know, for example, cough drop is used a lot in Utah. It shows that compared to other softwares, it's not as reliable. It's a lot more glitchy than other ones. So I would be a little bit cautious with using that one just because the carry through is not as great. The ones that I like, I try not to be biased in any way. I really like to work with Touch Chat as well as with TD Snap. Those are the ones that are probably the most commonly used. And then we have a big debate, right? What do we use? Motor plan based systems? Do we use the ones um, that are more um, now I'm losing the word, categorized in their linguistic based systems, like all the colors are in one place and all the weather is in one place and all the clothing is in one place, where maybe with a motor plan it's not as obvious that way. So you have these huge like factions almost that are like, oh, we're only doing LAMP or we're only doing TD Snap, and really in the end, the best thing for the client is that the family understands it and that the client understands it and that you as a facilitator understand it. So a lot of the times the solution is in the middle. I think we like to like pick pick one side over the other and but really in the end it's like about what the kid can learn, and that's what it's about. So I'm really not all on one side or the other. I am totally in the mixed group, just because some things work well for some families and they don't work for the others. So there's sometimes a little bit of trial and error. Now, since this is for early intervention, most likely you're going to be working with just pre-literate children, and the focus here should be on covering lots of vocabulary, teaching lots of vocabulary, and picking developmentally appropriate vocabulary with lots of different language structures and with lots of different language intentions. I'm going to talk about language intentions a little bit more in just a few minutes. But usually it's organized by context. So foods, maybe going to the park, maybe going to the pool, right? And different contexts that way. Now I want to just bring this up really quick. Um, just the caution on the use of like obviously we're going to be using symbols, but symbols are arbitrary. Kids have to first learn the symbols, right? If we're going through here, like what does this symbol actually mean, right? Maybe means something to you, but it doesn't mean the same to me, right? There's some that are pretty easy, like happy maybe and sad, but what about the ones that are a little bit more arbitrary? We talk about lots of different symbol properties, um, where I give this example of this is pretty clearly a football. Now, to me, I'm originally from Germany. Well, this is also football, but it's pretty arbitrary. It's pretty ambiguous because it's not as real as the actual picture. Now, culturally, this is a football to me, right? So you have to take that into consideration when you're looking at different symbol properties. Um, and also how acceptable is it and how efficient is it in communicating the things. Now, I want to give you a quick example of efficiency and familiarity. Now, when I did a training in Russia one year for PECs, And I was really happy when I saw these. I don't speak Russian, but I knew exactly what these were because of how efficient that symbol worked. But I had learned it before, right? So you have to take that into consideration that you're teaching a symbol. We can't just assume that a child is going to know the symbol and what it means just because you do. So that's the whole point of what I'm trying to bring across here. Now I have a couple more slides that I want to talk about when it comes to like how am I using this alternative approach to communication. Because if I have a child that has a lack of communication, there usually is a high level of frustration, not just on the side of the child, but also on the surrounding family, friends, siblings, anyone that comes in contact with that child. A lot of the times we'll see increased challenging behavior because of the lack of communication. And challenging behavior is often the only way the child is actually getting their needs met. And so that's obviously frustrating. It can be very isolating to the child, and it can slow down their cognitive development because there is this interplay between communication, language development, and cognitive development. It kind of like goes hand in hand. There's a decrease in the increase in world knowledge. So the child is learning less about how the world works, right? And then there's a lack of social interaction, which can also be very isolating. There can also be other things that the child can't communicate that then lead to more challenging behavior. So when it comes to non-speaking kids or minimally speaking kids, I often bring in this stress bucket, which seems to give people a good kind of understanding. Maybe some of you have seen this before. Um, some of the reasons why challenging behavior occurs, and just think about if you can't communicate those things. For example, physiological discomfort is part of what fills our stress bucket, right? Um, then you have like digestive issues, headache, pain, tension, anxiety. All those things fill the stress bucket. Now, sometimes a child may have challenging behavior, um, and it seems like it's out of nowhere, right? But actually, all day long, this stress bucket has been filling. They've had pain all day long, and now you're making them like sit in a certain chair. Now, that sitting in the certain chair has never been a problem, but today all of a sudden it is. And it's not because of the actual chair and that what you ask them to do, but it's because of all the things that have happened before earlier that day, right? And so sometimes the reason why we see a big meltdown is because that stress bucket is getting filled and filled and filled, and there's never an opportunity to empty it. So this like coping outlet, maybe for me, I work with a lot of autistic kids. Maybe the stimming that kind of helps them regulate, having a safe person, having a fidget toy, being in a quiet space. Those are all things for some of these kids that help them cope and empty the bucket continuously, that then help along the way. But if that's not given, then we're only going to continue to fill that bucket, and the kid can't communicate that, right? Um, Maybe there are lots of noises. They can't escape those noises. They can't tell you that they are being uncomfortable, that that clothes were put on that are scratchy or where the tag is really bothering them. And so the meltdown can look like shouting, self-harm, hiding, running away, right? And if all of that now gets emphasized even more by trauma reminders and multiple things going on at the same time, we're filling the bucket real, real fast. And so just think about that as you're maybe thinking about some of that challenging behavior that occurs. and the kid really maybe just wants to get out of a certain situation or wants to have a preferred item that they need. So that's when we bring in functional communication training. I'm going to skip this slide real quick, and go to this one. That communication really tries to accomplish a balance. Tries to accomplish a balance between learning to be flexible, but also being able to have a break. Doing non-preferred activities like we all do, such as vacuuming or mopping the floor, but also getting attention and getting your needs met, your sensory needs met. Doing things in a non-preferred way, going to non-preferred places, being in the presence of non-preferred people, all those things are things that, life is going to throw at a child. And at certain times, we're going to let the child get out of all of these things, but because we want them to be able to advocate for their own needs. But we want to accomplish this balance instead of only letting them get breaks all the time, getting their attention, and never being able to learn to be flexible and doing these non-preferred things so that they can be independent, right? So I know that that's a lot of information I'm throwing at you, but when I'm looking at alternative ways to help a child communicate, I teach them not just to request. A lot of the times, this is where we kind of stay. We stay with requesting, but we don't really teach them to reject. We don't really teach them to protest or to teach them to play in their own way, right? If it's a kid that's like really likes to bang things, and they want to play that way, like, wouldn't it be great if we taught them to say, like, I want to play it this way instead of your way? And then also asking for a break. These are all things that I will start teaching very early on to the kids that need alternative ways to communicate. And then this kind of goes full circle to the beginning. How do I teach it? I can use gesture. I can teach them a certain phrase in a script that they hand over. It can be a picture symbol. If they have words, I can teach them a word, or I can teach them through an AAC device. So the method of how I do it can be aided and unaided. It can be no tech or low tech. It can be mid tech or high tech. Really, in the end, am I teaching all the ways for them to advocate for themselves? And am I teaching, and in which way am I teaching how to do that? So those are all the things, the questions I would have you ask yourself as you're working with the kids that you're working with. And so I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to open it up to questions. I know it was a whirlwind.
So Daphne, that was a great introduction to all of that. I also love that you spent some time to remind us that we need to think of those barriers. Sometimes we just jump right in and don't think of that. So um, I will open it up for a minute to questions, um, comments.
And I saw that you posted the PowerPoint in the chat, so that's good.
Yep, and it will be on our Canvas page as well, so you can go back and review that.
Okay.
If there are no questions, then I'm going to quickly share my screen again, and I cannot wait to get all of your guys' recommendations and thoughts on this cute little child that I'm working on. So my name is Janelle Preston. I work in our up to 3 Part C early intervention program here in Northern Utah. I'm talking to you guys about Sammy, who is a 22-month-old little boy. He's recently been diagnosed with MYT1L, neurodevelopmental disorder. He just recently started walking. He uses a few signs to communicate. His family is immigrants from Ukraine, so they speak both English and Ukraine at home, and he just recently started attending daycare. On his early intervention team, he has the ABC, which is our autism specific services up here in up to 3. He also has occupational therapy and physical therapy. This diagnosis that parents received, the MYTL1, has been a really hard struggle for the family to receive that diagnosis. Some of the underlying things that happen with that is that there is just an overall global developmental delay. There's hypertonia. It has speech and language delays, as well as autism spectrum characteristics. Some of our goals that we have with this child and family is really to increase the child's ability to initiate and respond using multi ways to communicate. Helping the family understand using assistive technology. So I love Daphne's example of just always having that choice board that maybe is a little less threatening to the parents. And then just strengthening that parent-child bonding through play. This is a family that they are highly educated. They're both doctorates. They teach here at the university. And playing with their child is a little hard. They want to do more about a drill and practice with them. So that would be a great thing that we want to see happening, as well as we want to promote that consistency across environments. So how do we use some of the things that we're doing at a home visit, at daycare, and at all the therapies that they're doing? We want to work on creating or establishing a functional communication system. If we need to go to more of a high-tech AAC device, we want to be able to empower the family to be confident and really just continue those social emotional development through meaningful interactions. So I have 3 kind of themes that I would love answers on, and we're just going to break you up into groups. So the first one is getting your guys' insights on introducing assistive technology to the family. And then there's kind of 3 questions that go along with that. Understanding what you guys do to introduce AAC device, what happens when they're bilingual, and immigrant families may face when adopting AT. The next one is teaming. How do we use those across settings? And what are some tools or platforms you've used to share those with the group? And then just some social games. So what are some of your guys' favorite social games that promote joint attention and turn taking and emotional connection? And then, so Heather, your group is going to tackle question in number 1. Rebecca, you are on teaming, and then Kate, you're in those social game ones. So Tori will go ahead and open our breakout group today. So we won't be going over what the recommendations are, but I got to join in each of the break groups, and I can't wait to get all those recommendations from all you guys to share. I know that we all have had families that are pretty similar to this case, so make sure that you go back and review what those recommendations are, because you guys all come up with some amazing resources and information. We are next month, we're finishing up our assistive technology, so we will be having Jay Wheeler, who will be talking to us about low-tech mobility devices. So also some of that positioning that helps with communication devices. So thank you again for joining today, and don't forget to complete the survey. and we will see you next month.